Starting off this countdown, we have the wrong leg. A couple of years ago, a man named Bill ended up crashing his car into a tree after suffering from a seizure. As a result, both of his legs were crushed. Now it turns out that his right leg could still be saved, but his left leg needed to be amputated. But somehow there was a mix-up and someone mislabeled the films, so the surgeon amputated Bill's right leg and not the left. As a result of the mix-up and the surgeon's error, Bill lost both of his legs. I can't even believe that, like I am shocked at this one, but it gets worse. Moving on to number 9, we have the breast implants gone wrong. Now I heard the story last year and it immediately broke my heart. This is the story of Emma Lynn Nugent from Colorado. The 19-year-old was very insecure and decided she wanted to get breast implants. She even saved up her own money to get this procedure done. Little did she know how it would end for her. After being given anesthesia, she was left unmonitored for 15 minutes. During those 15 minutes, she went into cardiac arrest. When the doctor finally noticed, he performed CPR and was able to stabilize her. A few minutes later, she slipped into another cardiac arrest. But they never called an ambulance until 5 hours later. By that time, Emma Lynn was neurologically unresponsive. From then on, she was bedridden in a hospital. She could no longer speak, walk, eat, or take care of herself. A year later, she passed away. She was a promising young woman with a bright future ahead of her, but all of that was taken away from her because of the doctor's negligence and refusal to call for proper medical attention. In our 8th spot today, we got the sponge. Imagine undergoing a surgery only for the doctor to later realize he left medical instruments inside of you. I'd freak out, like what? So a couple years ago, Air Force Major Erica Parks noticed some unusual swelling in her stomach. She had just given birth, but several weeks later her belly continued to grow. After a CT scan of her abdomen, it was revealed that 2 gauze sponges were left inside of her. They actually were entangled in her intestines. Thankfully, they caught this sooner than later. But still, it took the doctor 6 hours to remove the sponges and all the infected tissue. That is messed up. Like, how do you misplace that and then leave it in someone? And now here's a fact to horrify you. In the United States alone, there are 4,500 to 6,000 cases per year that involve sponges and other surgical instruments getting left inside of patients. Moving on to number 7, we have the brain surgeries. When you're dealing with brain surgeries, honestly you gotta be super careful because one wrong move and it's over. Well, today let's take a look at 3 errors that all took place in the same hospital. So it took place at Rhode Island Hospital. This hospital is known as the best hospital of the state, as well as a great placement hospital for students at Brown University. So the first incident involved a 3rd-year resident. They didn't mark the side of the brain that was going to be operated on, but I believe that got solved before the person underwent the surgery, no worries. But the second time is even worse. An experienced doctor didn't mark which side of the head he was going to operate on. He said that he believed that he would just remember. Well, turns out that he didn't remember and the patient died a week later. That's not all. In the 3rd incident, both a neurosurgeon and the nurse at the hospital ended up operating on the wrong side of another man's brain. This is insane. Like, I feel like that's something you double check and then you triple check, you know? I feel like you should do that before any surgery. In our 6th spot today, we have Blake Fott. This is a very tragic case of a medical mistake that cost someone their life. So in 2007, Blake Fott was sent to the hospital for an ongoing illness that he was battling. While there, he was given liquids through an IV line that was placed through his neck. When he was all better, a nurse was sent to him to remove the IV line from his neck. But apparently, this nurse had 0 experience or training to do this, but she didn't tell anyone. And she didn't follow proper protocols, and when she removed the line, Blake started to gasp for air. The nurse, instead of getting help, just kept telling him to calm down. Well, basically, because she didn't remove it properly, a bubble of air entered Blake's blood vessels and traveled to his heart. He ended up dying from asphyxiation. This could have been avoided had the nurse told someone that she wasn't comfortable in removing the line. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Eric Hedgepeth. In July of 1987, Eric and his mom went to a hospital in Virginia to have his tonsils removed. But somehow during the procedure something went wrong and Eric stopped breathing and then his heart stopped. Now, news articles didn't really explain what caused this to happen or how, but it resulted in Eric slipping into a coma. He remained in this coma for 2 weeks. When he woke up, he was permanently paralyzed. He spent 8 months in a cerebral palsy center. Now he needs someone to be by his side 24/7 to care for him. In our fourth spot today, we have the case of Becky Anderson. In 2012, Becky Anderson went to Central Washington Hospital to get some polyps removed from her larynx. So she was put under anesthesia and a breathing tube was inserted into her mouth. Now for this procedure, I believe they use like a laser type device to zap off the polyps. Well, while doing so, the laser hit the breathing tube, causing it to rupture and burst into flames. After that, she was unable to speak or breathe on her own. She had to undergo a number of other procedures to correct the damage that was caused to her throat. In fact, her injuries were so terrible that she was stuck in the hospital, confined to her bed for 3 months. In the end, she sued the hospital and the company that made the breathing tube. She won $30 million for the lawsuit against the hospital. Coming in at number 3, we had the deadly stroke. A couple of years ago, a 60-year-old woman named Claire went to the ER complaining about bad neck pain and a bad headache. Well, the ER physician Brian Bledsoe took an x-ray of her neck and found that nothing was wrong. So he just assumed that she had slept on it weirdly or that she had pulled a neck muscle. So he gave her some pain medication and discharged her. Little did he know that those were the warning signs of a stroke. The next morning, he received a call from an ambulance transporting Claire, who had gone into cardiac arrest. She had died shortly after. To this day, Brian blames himself for Claire's death. He created a post online saying that if only he had listened more carefully and didn't rush Claire, he might have been able to save her and save her family from heartbreak. Moving on to number 2, we have the medication mix-up. In March of 2011, a 51-year-old man from Oregon underwent a cardiac bypass surgery. After the surgery, the surgeon ordered him to be given 150 milligrams of amiodarone to help stabilize his heart rhythm. The anesthesiologist administered 3 vials of this medication. He thought that the vial would contain 50 milligrams each. But because of an error at the hospital's pharmacy, each vial actually contained 900 milligrams. Sadly, the man overdosed on it and suffered permanent brain damage. As a result, he now needs constant care for the rest of his life. He received $12.2 million in damages. In our number 1 spot today, we have Hang Myoku. The case of Hang Myoku is a very tragic one. She was a former Korean model and singer that became obsessed with her looks and plastic surgery. She constantly wanted soft, young skin. As a result, she underwent a number of procedures involving getting silicone injected in her face. After a while, doctors refused to continue on with the procedures because they noticed that her face was becoming noticeably large. But that didn't stop her. She decided to take matters into her own hands and got silicone from the black market and injected the entire bottle into her face. When that wasn't enough, she proceeded to inject her face with cooking oil. This caused her face to become permanently swollen and scarred. She then underwent 10 operations to try and reverse what she had done to herself. The surgeons removed 60 grams of silicone, oil, and other foreign substances from her face and 200 milligrams from her neck. Sadly, they weren't able to reverse the swelling and scarring. Myoku greatly regrets what she did to herself and said that she wishes for her old face back. Starting off this countdown, we have the organs removed by mistake. Back in 2017, 36-year-old Alicia Cook Moore sadly lost her mom to breast and ovarian cancer. After that, she decided to undergo genetic testing to see if she had the genes for the same types of cancers. Her doctor pushed for her to get this surgery done, saying that she had a really high chance at developing the same cancer that took her mother's life. So she had her breasts, uterus, and ovaries removed as a preventative measure. A few weeks later, after her surgery, she visited another doctor. This doctor informed her that the genetic testing came back negative, meaning there was no need for her to get all those surgeries done in the first place. It was all for nothing. In the end, the surgeries actually caused a lot of health complications and caused a number of follow-up surgeries. And again, this was all for nothing. In our 9th spot, we have the glove and compresses. Back in 2017, a 48-year-old woman underwent a hysterectomy to get her uterus removed. When she woke up from the procedure, she had terrible pains in her stomach and was unable to urinate. The doctor was all like, you're fine, here's some pain meds. 3 days after the operation, this woman started having contractions, and while going to the bathroom, she ended up delivering a surgical glove and 5 compresses. Yes, 5. These were left inside of her during the surgery. That must have been horrifying. And apparently it was, because this woman had to go to therapy for the psychological trauma that it caused her. In our 8th spot, we have getting embalmed alive. In 2018, a 28-year-old Russian woman needed surgery to remove some ovarian cysts. This is a routine procedure. It should have went pretty smoothly. Unfortunately, during the procedure, instead of getting saline solution, she was injected with formalin, which contains formaldehyde, which is what they use to embalm corpses. When the doctor realized his mistake, it was too late. They tried to wash out her abdominal cavity, but the formaldehyde had already poisoned her. Over the course of a few weeks, her organs started to fail. Shortly after, she passed away. Moving on to number 7, we have the wrong sperm. Just from the title, you guys already know what's going down here. Basically, back in the early 2000s, Thomas and Nancy Andrews wanted to have a baby. Unfortunately, they were having trouble conceiving, so they went to a fertility clinic in New York. That's where Nancy was inseminated and successfully became pregnant. However, after giving birth to their child, they realized that their skin was way darker than theirs. The doctor was like, oh, you know, that's normal, your baby's skin will get lighter. Obviously, this wasn't the case, and they had a DNA test done. Turns out Thomas was not the biological father, and they injected someone else's sperm into her. In the end, they sued the clinic. Not sure what happened after that, but wow. Coming in at number 6, we have Wide Awake. In 2006, a man named Sherman Sizemore underwent surgery and was given the wrong dosage type of anesthesia. Now, there are 2 kinds of anesthesia that people typically receive during surgery. One is a paralytic, which stops movement, and the other is inhalation anesthesia to prevent pain, and that's when you're sedated. He was given both. The paralytic anesthesia was properly administered, but the other was not. So he was awake for half an hour. He couldn't move or speak, but he could feel the pain of the procedure. Finally, the staff noticed and gave him more anesthesia and finished the surgery. But imagine that, you're just laying there, feeling everything, and you can't scream for help. Well, turns out that this experience really traumatized him. After the surgery, people said he would behave strangely. He hated being alone, he suffered from insomnia, and when he did sleep, it was all vivid nightmares. It got to the point where he couldn't take it anymore, and sadly, he took his own life. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the markings. In 2000, a woman named Leanna Geddes underwent a C-section to give birth to her first child. But for some reason, her doctor, Alan Zarkin, thought it would be a good idea or a funny idea to carve his initials into her abdomen. And so that's what he did. After the surgery, Leanna held up a mirror to her stomach and saw the doctor's initials. She was horrified. In an interview, she said that she felt like a branded animal. She continued on saying, and I quote, "It was supposed to be one of the most exciting times in my life, but it was a nightmare." Dr. Zarkin was immediately suspended after this incident. In the end, Leanna sued the hospital and the doctor and settled for $1.75 million. Now, this isn't really a medical mistake, but I mean, the dude did mess up big time, even though he knew what he was doing. In our 4th spot, we have the wrong side of the brain. When you're undergoing a serious procedure like one involving the brain, you would hope that the doctor would triple check to make sure that everything goes smoothly, right? Well, in this case, surgeons at Rhode Island Hospital in 2007 operated on the wrong side of a patient's brain. But guess what? This didn't happen just once. It didn't happen just twice. No. It happened 3 frickin' times on separate occasions. Sadly, the last time it took the patient's life. The neurologist drilled into the right side of the patient's skull when he was having bleeding on the left side, and the scans clearly showed the left side. Sadly, the man passed away from this mistake. In our 3rd spot, we have the wrong lung. This next patient came in with a punctured lung. The doctor then had to collapse the lung in order to fix it. But the doctor had been on a 36-hour shift and was exhausted. In the end, he collapsed the wrong lung and the patient passed away. Sadly, the doctor was so traumatized and felt so guilty that he ended up taking his own life after being fired. In our 2nd spot, we have the urine. I hope you guys aren't eating right now because this next story it's quite disgusting, not gonna lie. So this story comes from registered nurse Reddit user Nay32. A couple of years ago, he was looking after a man with liver failure. He came in to check on the man and brought him his pills. To then wash the pills down, he grabbed a cup from his bedside table. The man popped the pills in his mouth and took a big gulp from the cup. That's when he realized that the cup had his urine in it. I told you, it's disgusting. That must have pissed him off. Pun intended. But seriously, that's disgusting. But at least it was his own urine and not someone else's? I don't know. Sorry guys, TMI. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the screwdriver in the back. In 2006, a man named Arturo Iturralde needed to get a titanium surgical rod in his spine. But during his surgery, his surgeon, Robert Ricketson, apparently couldn't find the rods that they used for this procedure. So instead, he decided to take a screwdriver that was in the room with him, remove the handle, and insert that into the dude's back. What the heck? And of course this went terribly wrong, like what else would you expect? Within a few days the screwdriver broke. In his back. In his spine. This led to a series of complications and worsened his spine. Arturo then had to undergo a number of other surgeries to fix this whole mess. Sadly, the man's life was shortened and he passed within 2 years. His estate filed a malpractice case against the surgeon and ended up with $5.6 million. But no amount of money will bring Arturo's life back.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have H.H. Holmes. This one is like the least fun double whammy ever, as this covers an evil doctor as well as America's first serial killer. Great, awesome combo. H.H. Holmes was a real piece of work, and it is said that his fascination with medicine started at a young age, as he used to perform fictional surgeries on his stuffed animals. I just played with rocks, but alright. While it has never been confirmed, it is highly believed that his first victim may have been his childhood friend. H.H. Holmes went on to go to medical school, and shortly after finishing he began killing people in order to steal their property. He then built himself a huge, horrifying home that he had built to include things like secret passages and trapdoors, soundproof rooms, doors that locked from the outside with gas jets on the inside, and he even had a kiln to cremate the bodies. I think it's safe to say he was absolutely terrifying and just the worst guy. Not only would he get close to women to take control of their finances and then kill them, but he would also require his employees to take out life insurance policies that named him as the beneficiary. Some of the bodies he even ended up selling to medical schools. Eventually he was found out, caught, and sentenced to death. It isn't exactly known how many victims he had, but it's thought to be somewhere over 200.
Number 9. Thomas Cream. This next one hits close to home for us in Canada. Thomas Cream originally graduated from McGill in 1876, and after that he traveled to London, England, not London, Ontario, that's important. This was during the time of the Industrial Revolution, so the demand for doctors was quite high. Thomas was there for business and apparently pleasure as well. He enjoyed London's nightlife. He would dance and drink and hook up with strangers, just all the things you want your medical doctor doing hours before a shift. Neat. But on November 15th, 1892, there were thousands gathered outside of the Newgate prison walls, eagerly awaiting the execution of one Dr. Thomas Cream. Well, now he's referred to as the Lambeth Poisoner. Cool nickname, not really, it's terrifying. If you had the misfortune of seeing this doctor, odds are he would just have tried to poison you just because he likes it. He actually did get caught once. He was convicted of poisoning a woman. He was given a life sentence in prison, but it's all about who you know, right? His brother bribed the governor of Illinois, so he poisoned 5 more people in London before eventually getting arrested again and then finally executed for a large crowd.
In our number 8 spot today we have Harold Shipman. Harold became a general practitioner in Lancashire, England after graduating from medical school, but in 1975 he ended up going into rehabilitation for a substance issue and for the writing of fraudulent prescriptions of the specific drug. In 1977 he ended up moving and starting a general practice that was doing quite well, but then some astute member of the community realized that Harold's patients were dying at quite high rates. Eventually the case was passed on to the police, and it was at first believed that Harold should be cleared of all suspicion, until the death of an 81-year-old under mysterious circumstances. Her family demanded an investigation because they noticed that her insurance beneficiary had been changed to Harold, which reeked of forgery, as well as the fact that she had died shortly after a home visit from him, despite her being completely fine before his arrival. They ended up exhuming the body and found that she had actually passed away from a morphine overdose, and the timing of that overlapped with the time Harold had been in the home. After further investigation, it was also realized that Harold also encouraged all of the families of those who passed to cremate the bodies, as well as he jumped through a ton of hoops to assure them that the cause of death he wrote down was the true and real cause. Anyway, to make a long story short, he was the worst, and thankfully he was finally caught. He was tried and convicted of 15 counts of his crimes, but after his conviction, an audit estimated his number of victims to be around 236.
Number 7. Michael Swango. When he was just a child, Michael Swango did not collect rocks, he didn't spin Beyblades with the boys, rather he had scrapbooks filled with horrible car accidents, or any crime scene that's awful to look at. Young Michael Swango had the specs in his closet just ready to go. As if there weren't any red flags there already, when Michael got to college, he decided to write his chemistry thesis on Georgy Markov. More specifically, he studied his horrific death caused by, you guessed it, poison. He was fascinated after that point. His newfound obsession was poisons and how they silently took lives. Now, during his 3rd year at school, 5 patients that had the misfortune of seeing him just happened to die afterwards. His classmates had a nickname for him. They called him 00 in reference to James Bond, License to Kill. That's a fun nickname. After an internship, people of course were starting to die off, but one individual survived, and she remembered that Swango had injected her with something just a minute before she started to experience seizures. Now, he still got away with it somehow. Then later on, he went to another hospital in Ohio in 1984, handed out donuts that made his staff sick, and then when they required treatment, he would then poison them. He got caught, was sentenced to 5 years, but was released after 2. He changed his name, moved to Virginia, got a job as a career counselor, and then poisoned those co-workers too. He got caught after doing this like 3 more times, and now he's serving 3 life sentences at ADX Supermax Federal Prison. This is actually insane. If I told you everything that he got away with, this video would be like 24 minutes long.
In our number 6 spot today, we have Arnfinn Nesset. Arnfinn wasn't exactly yet a doctor, but he was studying to be one, so we'll let it slide for today. At the time of his crimes, he was actually a nurse, and he ended up being charged for taking the lives of 22 different people. It is said that he committed these horrific crimes by injecting patients with a certain muscle-relaxing drug. This worked particularly well because of the fact that this is a drug which over time becomes very hard to trace in the body. This not only worked to conceal the fact that he was committing these crimes for quite some time, but once people did catch on, it became very hard to prove his guilt. The investigations into his crimes took 2 years, and his trial ended up lasting 5 months. He was sentenced to only 21 years in prison because in Norwegian law, this is the maximum someone can be given, even if they're being sentenced for the killing of 22 people. Apparently he was released from prison in 2004, and he then changed his name, and last I could find he was living somewhere in Norway. How terrifying.
Number 5. Jane Toppan. It's the 1800s, and Jane Toppan, aka Jolly Jane, is confessing to 31 murders. With that nickname and that many victims, I already know you're going to be sick to your stomach. Jolly Jane Toppan was a nurse working in Massachusetts. She would take care of the elderly, but instead of TLC, Jane would give them morphine and atropine, and then while they were slowly fading away, Jane would do the absolute creepiest thing that I've ever heard in my entire life. She would poison these old folks and then lie in their bed with them as they were passing away. I got goosebumps reading this whole thing. Okay, she managed to cuddle away the souls of 31 patients before eventually getting caught. This one did get caught. She's not like out there still, thankfully. She spent the remainder of her days laying alone, thankfully, in an asylum.
In our number 4 spot today, we have John Bodkin Adams. John was kind of similar to old Harold Boy we already talked about in the fact that he liked to not only kill his patients, but also commit fraud by making sure there was money or other valuables being left for him in their wills. Like, how do these people not realize how obvious that is? I like my doctor, but not enough to gift him my house after I die. It is said that from 1946 to 1956, John had around 160 patients that died suspiciously, and that out of those 160, 132 of them left valuables for him. Of course, the wills were later found out to be fraudulent, because, yep. Want to know something wild though? John was acquitted. How? I'm not really sure, but his trial established the doctrine of double effect, which is where a doctor giving treatment with the aim of relieving pain may lawfully, as an unintentional result, shorten life. How insane is that? Anyway, that makes me upset.
Number 3. Jayant Patel. After training in India, Jayant became a surgeon in 1984. He began his career in Buffalo, New York. great place to start. But it didn't take long for him to be fined. He was placed on probation for 3 years because he wouldn't check up on his patients before operating on them, which is insane. So later on, he was able to return, but his new coworkers witnessed him operating on their patients. The guy wouldn't even look at his own medical roster. He would just go to them and just start poking around for no reason. And a lot of the time, it would lead to their patient's death or serious injury. In 1998, he was prohibited from operating on the liver or pancreas, and when it came to any other surgery, he had to get a second opinion to go forward. This restriction was statewide come 2000 because 3 out of 4 cases ended up biting the bullet later on. He kept getting hired though, still over and over, hiding his past of course, but eventually come 2013, Patel pleaded guilty to 4 charges of fraud. He served 2 years in prison only. That's a nice fact to end on.
In our number 2 spot today, we have Karl Klauberg. I honestly wish I didn't even have to say this guy's name because he certainly isn't worth a spot in any of our brains, but unfortunately part of us getting better is knowing the horrors of our past. This evil person was a German medical doctor during World War II, and he was one of many terrible people who conducted experiments on those in concentration camps. After receiving the rank of chief doctor and studying gynecology, he ended up becoming a professor in the field. In 1933, he joined the bad team, which unfortunately is not a word I can say on YouTube, so not to make light of it, but just so we're all on the same page, in 1933 he became a Yahtzee, and then in 1942 he approached another piece of work named Heinrich Himmler and suggested that they conduct some experiments of mass sterilization on women. Yep, and they did it! They assigned him to block number 10 in the camp, and since this evil person wanted to find the cheapest and easiest way to carry out this horrible mission, it was usually acid that was injected into a woman's uterus. Sometimes the patients would be killed just so that they could perform autopsies. It is estimated that around 300 women were unfortunately subjected to these specific experiments, but in even worse news, that doesn't even scratch the surface of the terrible things that were done to people during this time.
And number 1, Linda Hazzard. Her last name really tried to warn us. She has since been dubbed the Starvation Doctor because back in the day, the late 1800s of course, if you somehow ended up in the office of Hazzard, it doesn't really matter what you're suffering with. Linda's advice, her medical advice to pretty much for everything was just too fast. Yeah, broken collarbone you say, skip lunch. More than 40 of her patients died due to, starvation, and she had her own sanitarium in Washington appropriately named Starvation Heights. Sounds like a great place to go and heal. You would think after 16 deaths caused by starvation at Starvation Heights, people would start asking questions. Wow, weird. Eventually, Major Chip Hazzard was caught, convicted, served 2 years in prison, and then 26 years later in 1938, she herself died of starvation. You played yourself.